For decades, residents in many states had to only provide their names and addresses in order to vote in federal elections. But in recent years, dozens of states have enacted voter ID laws that require government-issued photo ID. And it's not always easy to get that in the United States. Clara Ibarra has the story.
Las elecciones de 2008 fueron históricas.
The 2008 elections were historical as Barack Obama was elected the first black president in U.S. history. The Latino and African American vote was essential for this achievement of the Democratic Party.
En estados con una amplia historia discriminatoria.
In some historically discriminative states, the participation of these sectors were granted by a law that was in effect for more than 50 years and was revoked by the Supreme Court in 2013, promoting new laws that restrict the democratic participation.
One important part of the Voting Rights Act was a provision called Section 5 that required certain places that had a history of discriminatory voting practices, to actually have any change they make to their voting law or procedure cleared by the federal government or by a panel of judges before they could go into effect. The Supreme Court in a 2013 case called Shelby County versus Holder invalidated the formula that the law used to determine what places had to do this. Immediately after, we saw that the places that used to be covered by this law began implementing laws that made it more difficult to vote.
These new voting laws were approved by the federal government or a panel of judges before they went into effect. The new laws have been promoted by politicians of the Republican Party and are now in effect in 21 states. Now voters, among other restrictions, must show an ID with a picture if they want to vote. This may look elemental, but in the U.S., with more than 45 million immigrants, there's no national identity document.
There are 21 states that have laws this year in this election on the books that were not on the books 4 years ago. These run a range. We have laws that require people to show photo ID when they're voting, laws that make it more difficult for people to vote on days other than Election Day, laws that make it more difficult to register to vote.
The main supporter of these voter ID laws is ALEC, an organization linked with the Republican Party and financed by corporations. One of its co-founders, Paul Weyrich, who died in 2008, maintains that the vote should be considered a privilege, only for some people.
I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now. As a matter of fact, our leverage in the elections, quite candidly, goes up as the voting populace goes down.
ALEC, it stands for the American Legislative Exchange Council, and it's an organization of state legislators and corporations and right-wing, highly ideological think tanks. And they meet behind closed doors to develop model legislation that the legislators introduce in their own name. And in many cases, the model legislation that ALEC adopts benefits the same corporations that are funding ALEC.
Economic and political powers acting through the Republican Party have reverted history by creating voter ID laws, one of the multiple barriers that nowadays are restricting the right to vote in the U.S. I'm Clara Ibarra with Jose Monsalve and Elizabeth Press, Telesur, New York.